the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
It's tough. Like, it's really hard to get over the Kirby hump.
Yeah.
But when I look at it, and this year felt a little bit different. It felt like Tennessee they haven't closed the gap, but they were closer than they've been in any of the four. And I understand they got shut out in the second half again, but defensively, to me, I think they're pretty close. I think Tennessee is now at a point defensively where they're going to hang with Georgia. And Tim Banks coming back, I think, is quietly a big deal for Tennessee. Rodney Garner obviously doing a really good job. I mean, they're not getting home enough against Carson, 40 dropbacks, not hit. Like, that can't happen again. But I think Tennessee is pretty close. I mean, they're only going to have blue chippers at linebacker this year. I think that will help in the middle of the field. You're not going to have a walk-on safety. I mean, Will Brooks was good in moments, but that was somebody Georgia picked on a lot in that game. Like, I think you're going to be more athletic and you're going to be better there. Boo Carter will be a year older. The corners, best Tennessee corner tandem in 25 years. So I think that helps. But that to me is still where I'm like, okay, Tennessee is caught up a little bit with Georgia's offensive talent versus Tennessee's defensive talent. I think it's pretty close. But to me, it's still the offense that I don't know. Nico showed a lot of heart in that game. He ran the ball well. We talked about it before the year.
Did. And yeah, I was very impressed with his competitive character, for lack of a better term. Sorry to interrupt.
No, but I mean, now I guess from your vantage point and what you saw as an X's and O's guy, Graham, how has Heupel changed a little bit? Because now he's got 4 times he's played Kirby Smart's defense, and I mean, I know he's going into it like, here's what I saw last year. How do I fix this? How do I attack Kirby's defense in a different way? Did you see anything this year that looked different in the way Tennessee's offense went at Georgia?
I mean, yes, but I think those differences, if I'm being honest, were kind of a product of some of the limitations of this Tennessee offense. I think they were, sort of you saw more 2 tight end sets from Tennessee this year and more kind of physical smash mouth stuff. And they've always run the ball. They've always been committed to run the ball under Heupel. And I think that's a misnomer that gets thrown around a lot sometimes. You did see Tennessee run into some heavy boxes, which is not historically been the Heupel way. But it's I think they were willing and, maybe sort of had to run into some of those heavy boxes because of the limitations that they had at wide receiver and, some of the issues that I think Nico had in terms of being a strong intermediate passer. And the ball gets there quick when he throws to the boundaries. Right. But it felt like, he doesn't really see that middle of the field yet and see those layered throws that, you're dropping between linebackers and secondary guys. It feels like it's either I'm going to throw a 12-yard comeback to the boundary, which not everyone can do. He has an NFL arm in terms of the talent and the strength. But yeah, you don't really see that kind of more nuanced style to his game where he's seeing the field in a 3-dimensional way and using loft and trajectory to create more holes in a defense. All the holes that exist in the defense, I think from Nico's perspective are, he's throwing bullets, right? Unless he's chucking it deep. So I think Josh was probably limited in how he could attack defenses with Nico, especially a defense with Georgia that admittedly was not as good as it has been in years past, but still has dudes, who will make you pay if you make mistakes. And so I think that's the question for me, honestly, with Heupel moving forward is what's the solve, man? It doesn't have to be one thing or the other necessarily. And I think a lot of it is going to be dictated by personnel, but you see Tennessee get into these games against higher level defenses. I wouldn't even call them elite defenses at this point because I don't think Georgia was an elite defense this year. They weren't. I think they were a very good defense, but they were not, a top 10 defense in the sport in really any statistical measure. And the same thing happened against Ohio State. And oddly, the same thing happened against Arkansas, even though we know that wasn't an elite defense either. But they get in new games and things are either working or they're not. And when they're not, it's just like they just continue to kind of bang their head against the wall. And if it was just Nico in a 1-year sample set, I would say, well, that's probably the limitations of the quarterback they have and what they can run. But I do think at this point, seeing that's been the case with Hendon and it's been the case with Milton and now it's been the case with Nico, is that more of a system issue or I don't know how big his playbook is, to be honest with you. I think the system is less about the play calls sometimes and more about the numbers and the tempo. But
the tempo was gone this year. The tempo was just completely. But part of it is if these guys don't, it takes all 11. The tempo can't happen if your offensive line, when you have a transfer in Lance Hurd who had a rough year coming in from LSU. If you have the receivers who are in it, you need a young quarterback where you got to it requires so much. Hendon was able to run that tempo to an unbelievable degree. He's 24. Hendon was just elite.
He's a pro quarterback in college.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think, would it surprise me if there's more tempo next year with Tennessee? But I think that helps to your point of I think this offense, it's tough, but I also think Heupel deserves credit for adapting because there's a lot of coaches that, Graham, in this sport that they're no, I'm going down with the ship. I don't care. This is my way. And he doesn't do that. This whole year, I'm certain Heupel hated this season offensively. It drove him nuts having to do 12 personnel as much as he did. But when you saw against Oklahoma, he didn't have a choice. You have to go 12 personnel. We're going to sit on it and we're going to get away with a win here. But if your tackles can't block and your receivers aren't getting open, and when they do get open, they're dropping them, or Nico doesn't see him, or Nico's missing, it's what do you want him to do here? It's just, but his whole thing is I think Heupel is such a competitor that he will take the dubs over anything else. And I think there are some folks who won't do that. So I think now Heupel has kind of been a little bit undervalued and underappreciated in how he adapted to the circumstances this year.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I also think that, I credit him for, because the tempo thing, it might be Hurd, it might be a young quarterback, but it also may just be a nod and a recognition to the fact that the best unit on the field for Tennessee in 2024 was not its offense. It was its defense, and that defensive line in particular was the strength of that unit. And, I think that it's kind of hey, how do we keep those guys fresh? Mm-hmm. And they found good ways to do that. And dude, it's wild really to look back on that Georgia-Tennessee game now, because what happened? Georgia went on these long sustained drives in the second half, and they never really had much success running the ball from a yards per carry standpoint, but they were just efficient enough to stay on schedule and not get behind the chains and deliver some body blows that I think finally kind of added up as they got into the fourth quarter and, had a touchdown lead and went on a drive. But
it was Oscar Delp and Yurcek. It was the tight ends. That's where in the middle of the field.
Guys disappeared again. I came out of that game being okay, they finally figured it out. And they finally figured out if we run the offense through our tight ends, then we can make Carson comfortable, because if you went back and looked at the 2023 tape, what was he comfortable doing? It's not just that he threw to Brock Bowers, but that dude threw the ball up the seams as well as anybody. Never was really that great tossing the ball around outside the numbers. He was fine, but he wasn't, the NFL kind of throws that Carson made were all up the middle of the field. And so I just never understood why they didn't lean into that more. in 2024. I thought, like, other than the all too predictable, like, here comes Dylan Bell on a slant on 3rd and 7. There was kind of a lack of some of those routes in the offense. And I think what they, if you gave Mike Bobo or the offensive staff truth serum and gave them that critique for me, they'd probably push back and say, did you see Carson throw, 3 interceptions in a row over the middle of the field against Texas? Did you, or 2 in a row and then a 3rd out on the boundary? Like, he threw 3 in a row over the middle of the field against Florida too. I think, like, they had a particular problem where the midfield passing that they did do was to the wrong personnel, out of the wrong looks, with the wrong route combinations. And so I think they just kind of had this flawed thinking at times where it was like, well, that's not working over the middle of the field. We don't want to put the ball in danger and lose the game because we are -3 in the turnover column. So we're going to be real careful about throwing over the middle of the field. And, I think they kind of, by doing that, avoided some of the strengths of their offense and their quarterback. And I would have been very interested to see, like, what would have happened with them if they had just started running the offense through the tight ends. And I thought that's what they do with Gunner in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, like, I thought they'd say, hey, we're going to do a little, some zone read stuff and get them on the roll a little bit and have some of these tight ends leaking out on delays. And we're going to toss it to Lucky and Delp and Urasic, and we're going to let them go get some yards after the catch. And then we'll take our shots here and there and we'll control the football and win this game. And instead, they kind of ran the same offense that they had run with Carson Beck, which made very little sense to me.
Final thing, I'll get you out of here, Graham.
Yeah.
Georgia's playing Tennessee earlier next year. It's way too early, but a lot of the roster are pretty much, I think, done. Like, there's going to be a little bit more portal movement on both sides, but
I think there'll be a lot more portal movement on Georgia's side. Just for
a lot more. But what's a lot to you?
Well, I mean, I think there are some significant parts of 2025 Georgia that may not be currently on campus in Athens.
I'm going to say edge is somewhere.
One of them, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I still think they're going to get a quarterback in. And
interesting.
I still think it could be like a stud quarterback, or not a stud, but a starting quarterback. Like, I'm not
There's
sure.
a reason they brought in Fernando Mendoza.
Yeah, they brought. I mean, there's a reason they brought him in on a somewhat secret visit, so Zachariah Branch would happen to bump into him in the hallway and really they were serious about bringing in quarterback help.
With all that being said, though, I am curious, now that you've had 4 years of seeing Heupel versus Kirby. It's in Knoxville. It's earlier. Tennessee keeps. It's going to be a youth movement at receiver. You'll have David Sanders at right tackle. Seems like he's going to be a day one starter there. I think the tackles should be better. Lance Hurd, former 5-star, second year in the system, should have a much better understanding of what's asked. No Sampson, but Nico, year 2. Is there part of you that thinks Tennessee could give Georgia the most amount of problems and difficulties that Georgia's had to this point? I mean, the quarterback question at Georgia, the offense as a whole question. Is there a reason for Tennessee fans to start looking at that game as like, maybe it's not a, like, hey, this is just because I'm in the see it to believe it at this point with this series, but I don't know. I'm curious from your vantage point as we get out of here, Graham. Do you think it's something that will be better in 25 for Tennessee?
I think I'll frame it this way. I'm in the see it to believe it as well, just because I think that, like, you look at the offenses that score.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.